For decades, the world has seen the same image. Endless lines of Russian tanks rumbling across Red Square, soldiers marching in perfect formation, and generals saluting beneath the shadow of the Kremlin. To millions, it looks like an unstoppable force, the iron fist of a nation built for war. But here's the truth few ever talk about. Behind the polished parades and patriotic music lies a system held together by fear, loyalty, and illusion. Because the Russian army isn't just a symbol of power, it's a reflection of everything Russia is: proud, secretive, and dangerously unpredictable. Behind the spectacle, the synchronized marches, and the roaring engines, there's another story, one that rarely makes it to state television. The Russian army isn't simply a machine of war. It's a living institution shaped by centuries of conflict, politics, and survival. It carries within it the triumphs of the past and the burdens of a nation that's always prepared for its next fight. Every salute, every tank, every uniform hides a deeper reality, a force torn between modernization and the ghosts of its Soviet legacy. It's a paradox, an army that can inspire both fear and fascination, a force that can look unbeatable one moment and uncertain the next. It's built on discipline, but also on propaganda. It values loyalty over innovation, and while its parades project strength, the truth inside its barracks tells a more complicated story of soldiers struggling with outdated equipment, low morale, and a command system still chained to politics. On paper, the Russian army ranks among the largest in the world. Over 1 million active troops, tens of thousands of tanks, armored vehicles, and artillery systems. A legacy of decades spent preparing for wars that may never come, and yet never fully ready for the ones that do. For every display of strength, there's a flaw buried beneath it. For every success, a quiet failure that never reaches the public eye. Because the modern battlefield isn't won by sheer numbers anymore. It's won by coordination, technology, and adaptability. And those are the areas where the Russian army's greatest challenges lie. It's an institution trying to reinvent itself in an era that's moving faster than it can adapt. Half modern, half relic, part future, part past. But that's what makes it so fascinating. It's not just a military story. It's a story about identity, control, and survival. About a force that must constantly prove to its own people and to the world that it still deserves the fear and respect its name commands. So today, we're going beyond the headlines, into the roots of Russia's ground forces, to uncover how this vast army was built, what drives it, and what threatens it from within. We'll look at its structure, its soldiers, its weapons, and the culture that defines every decision it makes. And when it's over, you'll see that the Russian army isn't just fighting wars on the battlefield, it's fighting one within itself. Because if you think the ground forces are intense, wait until you see what's waiting in the skies above. This is the story of a military giant built on pride, tested by war, and haunted by its own legacy. Now, what is the backbone of Russia's army? Today's Russian army may look modern on the surface. New uniforms, digital camouflage, sleek equipment, but its structure still echoes the Soviet design that came before it. At its core, it's a massive layered machine built around one idea: control. Control of territory, control of manpower, and most importantly, control of loyalty. The Russian ground forces, officially called the Sukhoputnye Vojska, form the backbone of the country's military power. They're divided into several key branches: motorized rifle troops, tank units, artillery and missile forces, air defense troops, and the elite airborne divisions known as the VD. Each branch has its own traditions, strengths, and flaws, but together, they create the image of a military that's always preparing for the next major war. At the top sits the general staff, the nerve center that links the army to the Kremlin. Every decision flows downward through a strict hierarchy, from the chief of the general staff to district commanders, to the officers in charge of armies, divisions, and brigades. It's an old system, efficient on paper, but often slow in reality. Orders can take hours, even days, to travel from command to the front line, and soldiers have little freedom to adapt on their own. That top-down structure, inherited from Soviet doctrine, still defines how the Russian army fights. Beneath the general staff are the military districts: Western, Southern, Central, Eastern, and the Arctic Joint Command. Each covers a vast region, functioning almost like a mini army of its own. The Western District, based near Moscow, is the crown jewel, home to the 1st Guards Tank Army, one of the most prestigious formations in Russian history. This is the unit meant to lead large-scale armored offensives, a relic of Cold War planning, but still central to Russia's vision of land warfare. The motorized rifle divisions are the workhorses of the army, regular infantry supported by armored vehicles. They make up most of the ground forces, tasked with holding ground and absorbing pressure in prolonged conflicts. Then there are the tank divisions, centered around Russia's heavy armor, T-72s, T-82s, and T-92s, the iconic machines that form both the pride and the myth of Russian power. These tanks are symbols of strength, but they also reveal the army's biggest weakness: reliance on quantity over quality. For every advanced T-90M, there are dozens of older models that haven't seen true modernization in decades. Supporting them are the artillery and rocket forces, arguably the most feared part of the Russian arsenal. Multiple launch rocket systems like the Grad and Smerch, as well as tactical missile units equipped with Iskander launchers, give the army its devastating long-range punch. In Russian doctrine, artillery isn't just support, it's the core of the fight. The old Soviet phrase, "Artillery conquers, infantry occupies," still holds true today. And then there's the VD, Vozdушno-desantny Vojska, the airborne troops. To Russia, they're more than soldiers. They're a national brand. Recognizable by their blue berets and fearless reputation, these elite paratroopers are celebrated every year in massive ceremonies across the country. They're trained for rapid deployment and high-risk missions behind enemy lines. But even they've struggled to maintain their legendary status in modern conflicts. Equipment shortages, outdated transport aircraft, and changing warfare tactics have challenged their once mythic aura. Despite its size and organization, the Russian army structure remains deeply rigid. Innovation moves slowly, and lower-ranking officers are rarely allowed to make independent decisions. It's a system that prioritizes discipline over creativity, effective in predictable wars, but dangerously outdated in fast-moving modern ones. Still, within this massive hierarchy lies a paradox that defines the entire force. The same rigidity that limits it also gives it endurance. Russia's army might not always adapt quickly, but it doesn't collapse easily either. It's built to absorb punishment, to retreat, regroup, and fight again, the same way it has for centuries. This structure, equal parts strength and vulnerability, reveals the essence of the Russian army's design: centralized power, relentless endurance, and a stubborn refusal to change, even when change is what's needed most. Russia's extraordinary weapons and technology. If there's one thing Russia takes pride in, it's its weapons. From Cold War icons to modern prototypes, the Russian army has always used its technology as both a tool of war and a message to the world. We are still a superpower. But behind that message lies a fascinating contradiction: a military built on both innovation and illusion. Let's start with the most recognizable symbol of Russian power: the tank. No weapon defines the Russian army more than the thunder of its armored divisions. For decades, the T-series tanks, the T-72, T-80, and T-90, have rolled across countless battlefields. Their silhouettes instantly recognizable. Rugged, simple, and relatively cheap to produce, they've become Russia's signature export. The T-90M, the latest in the line, boasts advanced armor composites and modern fire control systems, a blend of Soviet durability and 21st century engineering. But for every T-90M that rolls off the line, dozens of older T-72s and T-80s still form the Army's backbone, many built before the fall of the Soviet Union. The result is a force that looks modern from afar, but reveals its age up close. Then there's the elusive T-14 Armata, the so-called tank of the future, unveiled in 2015 with promises of revolutionary design, an unmanned turret, advanced sensors, and cutting-edge protection systems. It quickly became the star of Russian military showcases. But production has been slow, expensive, and riddled with technical setbacks. To this day, only a handful have entered service. The Armata is less a weapon of war and more a symbol, proof that Russia can still dream big, even if those dreams are hard to deliver. Beyond the tanks, Russia's true strength lies in its artillery and rocket systems. In Russian doctrine, artillery isn't just a supporting force, it is the battle. The Army's philosophy has long been that firepower wins wars. Systems like the BM-21 Grad and BM-30 Smerch can blanket entire areas with rockets in seconds, leaving little behind but smoke and silence. More advanced systems like the Iskander M give Russia the ability to strike deep with precision, capable of carrying both conventional and nuclear warheads. This focus on mass firepower defines the Russian way of war. Overwhelm the enemy with sheer volume before moving in to occupy what's left. But as warfare evolves, so too does the need for eyes in the sky. Drones and electronic warfare have become crucial tools for any modern army, and here, Russia is still catching up. The country has developed a range of domestic drones, Orlan 10, Forepost, Lancet, useful for surveillance and tactical strikes. Yet many are built using imported components or outdated tech. Despite flashy propaganda, Russia's drone fleet still lags behind Western and Asian counterparts in range, reliability, and precision. In a world where battles are increasingly digital, that technological gap becomes a serious vulnerability. The same goes for communication and logistics, the silent systems that keep armies moving. Modern wars are fought with data as much as bullets, and reliable communication can decide entire battles. But Russia's command networks remain vulnerable to jamming and interference, forcing soldiers to improvise with unsecured channels. Supply chains, too, have long been a weak spot. Spare parts for tanks and trucks often vanish into corruption or mismanagement, leaving units stranded far from the front lines. Even basic maintenance can turn into a logistical nightmare. Yet despite all of that, Russia continues to innovate, or at least to project innovation. Every year, the country hosts the Army Exhibition, a massive military expo designed to show the world its latest breakthroughs. New combat vehicles, laser systems, and robotic platforms. It's part technology fair, part theater. And while many of those prototypes never reach mass production, they serve their purpose to remind both citizens and rivals that Russia's military complex is alive, ambitious, and still chasing the dream of superpower status. What makes this technology fascinating isn't just what it can do, but what it represents. Every new weapon is a statement, not just of strength, but of identity. Russia builds machines to prove that it hasn't been left behind, that its military legacy still matters. Even when the hardware falls short, the message is loud and clear. You may doubt us, but you will never ignore us. Now, let's get to Russia's training and morale. Behind every tank, missile, or piece of propaganda stands the real backbone of the Russian army, its soldiers. The men and women who live, train, and fight within one of the harshest military cultures on Earth. And while Russia's weapons are often showcased on global television, the human side of its army tells a story that's far less polished, one built on endurance, fear, and loyalty tested to the breaking point. For many young Russians, joining the army isn't a choice, it's an obligation. Conscription remains a national tradition, with hundreds of thousands drafted every year for 1 year of service. Officially, it's a period of patriotic duty. In reality, it's often a crash course in survival. New recruits, some barely out of school, find themselves thrown into a system that values toughness above all else. Training camps are remote, cold, and unforgiving. Physical exhaustion is constant. Mistakes are punished harshly. Discipline isn't just taught, it's enforced. This culture stems from a long history of seeing hardship as strength. The idea is simple. Only the toughest soldiers can serve in the toughest army. But that mentality often blurs into something darker. For decades, Russian conscripts have faced a brutal hazing tradition known as Dedovshchina, a cycle of abuse where older soldiers dominate new recruits. Despite official attempts to stamp it out, stories continue to surface of beatings, humiliation, and even deaths. In many units, it's not just a secret, it's a routine. The message is clear. Only those who endure the pain truly belong. Training itself focuses less on creativity and more on repetition. Soldiers drill the same maneuvers over and over again until they can be performed without thought. There's little room for improvisation, and initiative is rarely rewarded. It's a system designed to produce obedience, not innovation, a reflection of the Army's command philosophy, where orders flow one way and questioning them can be seen as disloyalty. To Western observers, it can look outdated. To the Russian military, it's tradition. But within this rigid framework are pockets of excellence, elite formations where standards rise sharply. Units like the VD Airborne Troops, Spetsnaz Special Forces, and certain Guards divisions undergo intense specialized training that rivals that of Western counterparts. Paratroopers are trained to operate deep behind enemy lines, surviving with minimal supplies. Spetsnaz units practice sabotage, reconnaissance, and psychological warfare, missions that demand both discipline and daring. These soldiers see themselves as the elite of the elite, and their pride runs deep. Yet even among them, resources can be stretched thin, and modern training equipment is often scarce. Morale across the broader army fluctuates wildly. In elite units, it's built on pride and tradition. In regular ones, it often depends on leadership, or the lack of it. Long deployments, poor living conditions, and delayed paychecks erode motivation. Corruption within the supply chain means soldiers sometimes go months without proper gear or rations. Many learn to improvise, fixing their own equipment, buying their own uniforms, or sharing basic supplies. In some cases, families back home send money and food to support them. It's a silent struggle hidden behind the army's official image of unity and strength. Still, what's remarkable is how Russian soldiers endure it all. Through every hardship, there's an underlying sense of duty, not necessarily to politics or even to leadership, but to each other. In the trenches, bonds form that no propaganda can manufacture. They fight for their comrades beside them, not the men in Moscow. That shared suffering creates a kind of resilience that outsiders often underestimate. It's the same spirit that's carried the Russian army through centuries of impossible wars. The belief that no matter how bad things get, surrender is never an option. But morale is a fragile thing. It's not measured by the number of tanks or missiles, but by trust. Trust in leadership, trust in purpose, trust that sacrifice means something. And as modern warfare becomes more complex and unpredictable, that trust is being tested like never before. The question now isn't whether Russian soldiers are brave. History has already answered that. The question is how long bravery can hold together an army that's being stretched to its limits. Russia's leadership and corruption. Every army depends on its leadership. And in Russia, leadership doesn't just command the army, it defines it. The Russian military structure has always been deeply political, shaped by loyalty to power more than by strategy or innovation. It's not just about who holds the highest rank, it's about who stands closest to the Kremlin. At the top of the pyramid sits the General Staff, led by the Chief of the General Staff, the most powerful uniformed figure in the country. But his influence often extends only as far as the president allows. Above him stands the Minister of Defense, a civilian role that, in practice, functions as an extension of political authority. The two most famous in recent history, Anatoly Serdyukov and Sergei Shoigu, reveal everything about how Russia views its military leaders. Serdyukov, appointed in 2007, came not from the ranks of soldiers but from the world of business and taxation. His job was to modernize the military, cut waste, reduce corruption, and reform the bloated bureaucracy. He made enemies fast. Generals accused him of disrespecting military traditions. Old power networks resisted his changes. But for a brief moment, it looked like real reform was possible. Then, in 2012, everything collapsed. A corruption scandal erupted over misuse of defense funds, a case so vast it shocked even Russians accustomed to government graft. Serdyukov was quietly removed, never jailed, and replaced by someone very different, Sergei Shoigu. Shoigu wasn't a soldier by training either, but he knew how to project authority. Charismatic, media-savvy, and fiercely loyal to the president, he became the public face of Russia's new military revival. Under his leadership, the army's image transformed. New uniforms, modern parades, sleek technology displays. The message was clear. The era of humiliation is over. But behind that message, the same old networks remained. Generals enriching themselves through contracts, officials taking kickbacks, and factories cutting corners while reporting success on paper. Corruption in the Russian army doesn't just waste money, it kills efficiency. Equipment budgets vanish before reaching the front lines. Contracts for new vehicles are inflated to absurd prices. Repairs are delayed until equipment breaks completely. In some cases, entire battalions exist only on paper. Soldiers listed for payroll who never actually serve. The term "ghost soldiers" isn't just a rumor. It's a symptom of a system where loyalty often matters more than honesty. Even the most advanced military plans can crumble under that weight. Supplies meant for active units are sold on the black market. Fuel shipments are lost in transit. Commanders underreport casualties to protect their careers. The structure becomes self-preserving, an army within an army, where truth is filtered through fear. Officers learn early on that it's safer to report success than to admit failure. And in a system built on appearances, illusion becomes policy. Yet, despite all this, Russia's military leadership continues to project unity. The Kremlin demands it, and the public expects it. Every year, grand parades on Victory Day showcase soldiers marching in perfect precision. Shoigu riding through the streets in his armored limousine, generals saluting the flag. The spectacle is mesmerizing. and carefully designed to conceal the cracks underneath. To the world, it says, Russia is strong, disciplined, and untouchable. To those inside, it says something else. Stay loyal, stay quiet, and you'll survive. This leadership model, part command, part politics, part theater, has kept the Russian army functioning for decades. It rewards loyalty, punishes dissent, and shields those who protect the image of power. But it comes at a cost. When every decision must pass through layers of politics, when truth is filtered through fear, the army loses its greatest weapon, adaptability. Wars aren't just fought with bullets. They're fought with honest information. And in a system where bad news rarely travels upward, even the strongest army can stumble. Because in the Russian army, failure isn't just a military risk, it's a political one. And that fear shapes everything from battlefield strategy to the lives of the soldiers below. It's what makes the army both resilient and fragile, disciplined and dysfunctional, proud and paranoid, all at the same time. The bigger question is what really happens on the battlefield. Every army looks powerful on paper, but wars aren't fought on spreadsheets, and no amount of propaganda can hide what happens when theory meets the battlefield. For the Russian army, that collision has exposed both brilliance and vulnerability, flashes of innovation wrapped in layers of chaos. On the surface, Russia's ground forces are designed for large-scale conventional warfare, the kind that dominated the 20th century. Massive tank formations, coordinated artillery strikes, and deep operations meant to crush an enemy through overwhelming force. It's a strategy built for size, not speed. For decades, that approach worked. The idea was simple. If you can't outthink the enemy, outnumber them. But the world has changed. Modern warfare moves faster, smarter, and far more unpredictably than the doctrines Russia still teaches. The biggest challenge isn't the soldiers, it's the system. Communication failures, outdated logistics, and rigid command structures have turned what should be precision operations into battles of endurance. In many cases, field commanders still rely on paper maps and short-range radios that can be jammed with ease. The result is confusion. Units advancing without full coordination, supplies arriving late, and intelligence often outdated by the time it reaches the front. What should be a synchronized assault can quickly dissolve into fragmented skirmishes. And yet, despite all of this, Russian forces continue to adapt in ways the world often underestimates. Engineers repurpose civilian drones for reconnaissance. Mechanics turn scrap parts into working vehicles. Soldiers develop creative tactics in the field, learning through necessity rather than instruction. It's improvisation born of survival, a strength the Russian army has always had, stretching back to the days of the Eastern Front in World War II. When the system fails, the soldiers themselves become the system. That resilience, however, doesn't erase the deeper flaws. Corruption bleeds into combat readiness. Spare parts that were never delivered, fuel siphoned away, and intelligence lost in bureaucracy. All of it costs lives. Sometimes the difference between success and disaster isn't the enemy's strength, but the army's own inefficiency. It's a problem that no amount of patriotism or propaganda can cover forever. The contrast between the public image and the battlefield reality couldn't be sharper. On television, Russia's military is portrayed as flawless, unstoppable columns of armor, precision strikes, heroic soldiers. In the field, things are far more human. Soldiers exhausted, commanders frustrated, and technology pushed beyond its limits. Victory isn't guaranteed. It's wrestled out of chaos through sheer endurance and willpower. And that's what defines the Russian army more than anything: endurance. It's the same quality that's carried it through centuries of conflict, from Napoleon's invasion to the frozen trenches of World War II. The ability to absorb punishment, to bend but not break, to fight on even when everything else collapses. It's not elegant, it's not efficient, but it's effective in its own brutal way. Russia's military doesn't rely on perfection. It relies on persistence. But the modern battlefield is unforgiving. Drones replace scouts. Satellites replace maps. Artificial intelligence replaces instinct. And in that new era of warfare, raw endurance isn't enough. The Russian army's greatest test isn't a foreign enemy, it's time itself. Can a force built on the lessons of the past truly survive the wars of the future? Because in the end, the Russian army's toughest opponent may not be across the border. It may be inside its own system. Russia made many attempted efforts to modernize their military. For the past 2 decades, Russia has been fighting a war not just against its enemies, but against time itself. The collapse of the Soviet Union left behind an army that was massive but broken. too large to maintain, too corrupt to reform easily, and too proud to admit its weaknesses. Modernization became the new mission, not just new weapons, but a new identity. A promise to turn the old Red Army into a modern fighting force ready for the 21st century. The transformation began in the late 2000s with what the Kremlin called New Look reforms. The goal was simple: smaller, faster, smarter. Gone were the days of millions of conscripts forming endless divisions. The new vision focused on professional soldiers, mobile units, and precision-based warfare. Instead of preparing for total global conflict, Russia wanted a military that could move quickly, strike decisively, and project power anywhere within its sphere of influence. At first, the results were impressive. Outdated divisions were reorganized into brigades designed for rapid deployment and flexibility. Training programs were restructured to focus on readiness rather than ceremonial drills. Salaries rose, living standards improved slightly, and new technology started flowing into select units. The world began to notice. When Russia intervened in conflicts abroad, its military looked sharper, more organized, and more confident than it had in years. The message was clear: the bear was awake again. But modernization came with limits. The Russian defense industry, once the pride of the Soviet Union, was struggling to keep up with the world's most advanced militaries. Factories still operated on outdated machinery. Engineers left for better pay overseas. Corruption ate away at every layer of production. For every modern T-90M tank or Su-35 fighter that rolled out of assembly, there were hundreds of older models still in use, patched, repainted, and reclassified as modernized. On paper, progress looked massive. In reality, it was selective. Still, the reform efforts gave Russia something it hadn't had in decades: confidence. New uniforms, upgraded vehicles, advanced missile systems, and a growing presence in global conflicts all signaled a comeback. Programs like State Armament Plan 2020 promised to rearm the military with over 70% new or upgraded equipment. The Kremlin used that figure constantly, a number meant to symbolize success. But few knew what modern really meant. In many cases, modernization simply meant retrofitting Soviet-era equipment with new electronics or paint. Upgrades that looked good on television but didn't solve deeper structural problems. The Russian army is a story of opposites: strength and fragility, pride and pain, illusion and endurance. It's a force that has outlived empires, rewritten history, and survived collapse more than once. For centuries, it has stood as both sword and shield, defending the homeland while defining what it means to be Russian. But that same legacy is also its burden. The army that once conquered half of Europe now fights a quieter battle: the struggle to adapt to a world that no longer fights on its terms. Its power is undeniable, but so are its problems. Behind the polished parades and patriotic speeches lies a system stretched thin by corruption, by bureaucracy, by time. Its soldiers remain some of the toughest in the world, hardened by brutal training and driven by a sense of duty that outsiders rarely understand. But toughness can only go so far when modernization lags behind and leadership hides behind politics. The Russian army's greatest strength, its will to endure, may also be the very thing that stops it from evolving. And yet, the world can never count it out, because every time history has written off Russia, it's come back stronger. From Napoleon's invasion to the fall of the Soviet Union, the same truth has echoed through the centuries. Russia's army bends, but it doesn't break. It adapts in ways the world never expects, fueled not by perfection, but by persistence. That resilience, raw, imperfect, relentless, is what keeps it alive. But survival alone isn't victory. The next challenge for the Russian army isn't just on the battlefield, it's within. Can a force built on tradition learn to thrive in the digital age? Can a system designed for control learn the value of flexibility? The answers to those questions will decide whether the Russian army's future is one of revival or repetition. And as this chapter closes, one thing is certain: the story of the Russian military is far from over. Because for every tank rolling across the plains, there's something else soaring high above, faster, quieter, and just as mysterious. The next chapter of this series takes us into the clouds, where Russia's power takes on an entirely new form. This was the Russian army. Next, we could go anywhere: the US, China, Israel, even North Korea. Comment which military you want me to dissect next. You want me to dissect next. You want me to dissect next.